Hey guys, tonight we step quietly into a world where the walls are cold, the halls are dim, and the beer, yes beer, is sacred. You're not entering a raucous tavern. No, you're easing into a monastery cloaked in mist, where monks whisper their prayers and brew ale in almost holy silence. You can hear the soft crunch of gravel beneath your sandals as you trudge toward the abbey gate, and if you listen closely, closer than usual, you might just hear the faint bubbling of a wooden barrel fermenting behind stone walls. It's the Middle Ages and you're about to become one of them. A novice monk. Your job? Wake before sunrise, chant in Latin with your eyes still half shut, and between prayers, study and endless chores, learn to brew beer so pure that even the angels would have refills. But don't get ahead of yourself. The journey begins before dawn, with breath visible in the frosty morning and a single bell echoing across the countryside. There's something both eerie and oddly cozy about the place. The wooden door groans open slowly. No one speaks, not because they're unfriendly but because, well, speaking is kind of off limits. Silence is the default here, unless you're singing. So if you're someone who can't go 5 minutes without checking your phone, you probably wouldn't survive this week in the Abbey. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, if you're watching from somewhere unique, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always amazing to see where everyone's drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step through the gate. Inside, a sleepy hush coats everything. The courtyard is wrapped in fog, and somewhere a bird gives one sharp cry before going quiet again. You follow a path worn smooth by centuries of sandals and bare feet. Every stone, every creaky hinge, seems to have soaked in 1,000 years of soft chants and steaming kettles. You're led by Brother Matthew, who smells faintly of thyme and damp wood. He nods, motions, but says nothing. Monks here follow the rule of Saint Benedict, a strict 6th century guidebook for living a disciplined life of prayer, work, and yes, brewing. This rule governs everything from when to sleep, when to eat, when to pray, and how to do it all while keeping your thoughts humble and your feet blistered. As you walk past the cloister, you spot a barrel the size of a horse lying beside the herb garden. You'll learn soon enough that it's not just decorative. Inside it, miracles of fermentation are underway. It gurgles slightly. Not in a sinister way, more like a warm stomach just before breakfast. The buildings are low, stone-built, and never quite warm. The air smells of old books, tallow candles, and something earthy that might be barley. The scriptorium is where you'll copy ancient texts, but your true training lies elsewhere. In the brewhouse, tucked between the bakery and the infirmary, steaming even before dawn. The first time you're brought there, your breath fogs up in the cold. The brewmaster monk, his robe patched, hands calloused, waves a wooden ladle with the gravitas of someone conducting a symphony. He's stirring wort, a hot, sticky mixture that smells like breakfast cereal left too long on the stove. You pretend to understand what he's doing. You don't. One mainstream fact: medieval monasteries really were the centers of brewing in Europe. Monks preserved recipes, improved fermentation techniques, and even set the early standards for beer purity, centuries before national brewing laws existed. It's thanks to them that modern brewing even exists. But here's a quirky little tidbit. Some of the earliest fermentation methods involved singing hymns directly into the brew. Did it change the flavor? Historians still argue whether this was superstition or science. After all, sound waves do vibrate molecules, and maybe Gregorian chants improved the fermentation. Or maybe the monks were just very bored. You spend your first evening cleaning flagstones with a brush made of pig bristles. It's not glamorous, but it's oddly calming. The silence of the place gets into your bones. At meals, no one speaks. Instead, one monk reads aloud from a dusty book while the others chew their barley stew quietly. You're pretty sure the reader has fallen asleep mid-sentence at least twice. No one seems to mind. Later that night, you're shown to your cell, a narrow stone room with a straw-stuffed mattress, a single candle, and a window no bigger than your face. Outside the stars blink coldly. Somewhere a windmill creaks. As you lie down, you hear the low hum of a chant begin. You didn't notice it before, but now it wraps around your mind like a wool blanket. It's coming from the chapel, where the older monks are beginning vigils, prayers that happen long before sunrise. You'll be there tomorrow, and the day after, and every day for the rest of your life, technically. Sleep comes slower than you'd expect. The mattress scratches. The candle guttering reminds you of your old bedside lamp, but dimmer, softer. You realize, nothing here is fast. Not the chant, not the brewing, not even time itself. It stretches, smooth and thick, like honey slowly warming over a fire. And somewhere, just barely audible, the brewhouse bubbles into the night. The bell tolls again. One long, low note that rolls across the stone corridors and rattles your ribs. It's still dark outside, darker than you remember darkness being. You sit up, bleary-eyed and cold, wrapping your robe tighter around you. No alarm clocks here, just that bell and the insistent silence that follows. You shuffle down the hallway, bare feet against chilled flagstones, joining the line of monks heading toward the chapel. No one speaks. A few of them nod sleepily, their hair tousled in that "I've been praying since 3 a.m. kind of way." You nod back and try not to yawn. It's too early to think. But then again, that's kind of the point. The rule of Saint Benedict, written sometime around 530 CE, governs everything here. Everything. It's not just a book of advice, it's the literal code of life in these walls. Think of it as a medieval operating system, updated never, yet still running flawlessly on sleep-deprived hardware. Prayer 7 times a day. Manual labor. Meals at fixed hours. No idle chatter. Silence, work, devotion. And beer. Yes, beer is folded neatly into that rule if you know where to look. The rule encourages moderation in all things, especially food and drink. Wine is mentioned directly, with Benedict famously saying it should be consumed in moderation, lest it make monks forget their vows. But when wine wasn't available, monks got creative. And by creative we mean deliciously practical, beer. It wasn't called beer back then though. Depending on the region and the century, it might be referred to as cervigia, or ale, or even simply liquid bread. Whatever the name, it flowed through the veins of every functioning monastery, sometimes literally. You walk through the courtyard, still shivering. A sliver of moonlight glints off the dewy grass. Your breath puffs like smoke. The chapel doors creak open, and you're bathed in warm candlelight and the smell of old wax. Inside, the monks are already beginning to chant. Their voices are low, steady, vibrating softly through the stone arches. It's Gregorian chant, and it moves like a tide, repeating phrases, rising gently, then falling again. You slip into a seat, heart still half asleep, and try to keep up. You don't. But that's okay. You hum along under your breath, feeling the vibrations more than following the Latin. Mainstream historical fact. Benedictine monasteries across Europe became centers of literacy, agriculture, and, yes, brewing. These monks weren't just praying and copying books. They were farming, engineering, and innovating. Monastic life created the rhythm that would shape Europe's daily life for centuries. Quirky tidbit. Some monasteries used sand-filled hourglasses to time both their prayers and their beer boils. Imagine being in the middle of Vespers and flipping a giant hourglass to make sure your wort didn't scorch. Historians still debate whether Saint Benedict intended his rule to apply to beer at all, or if monks later interpreted the rule with a very convenient level of flexibility. After all, when the rule says a monk should abstain from overindulgence in drink, that still leaves a lot of room for interpretation, especially when the drink keeps you alive in the absence of clean water. After the first round of prayers, you return to the dormitory, but not to sleep. You help clean the candle holders and sweep the floor. The day has begun. And somewhere the brewery is already waking up too. You pass the brewery again on your way to the refectory. A monk stirs something large and steaming with a spoon the size of a paddle. You can smell barley, maybe hops. It's earthy and warm and oddly comforting, like the ghost of toast. You eat breakfast in silence. Brown bread, onion soup, something green that might be cabbage or might be punishment. It's fine. You're starving. Then comes the morning labor. You're assigned to the herb garden today where you pluck lavender, sage, and wormwood. Not just for medicine, many of these herbs end up in beer. Before hops became standard, monks flavored their brews with whatever was growing nearby. Rosemary, spruce tips, even rose petals. It wasn't about artistry. It was about keeping the beer from going sour. Preservation through improvisation. Later, while trimming mint near the old stone wall, Brother Matthew hands you a small scroll with today's brewery assignments. Your heart skips. You're finally going in. Inside the brewhouse, the air is warm and damp. The walls are stained with age. You can hear bubbling, dripping, distant thuds. The light filters in through high slits in the stone, illuminating steam and dust motes. It feels like entering the lungs of a dragon that only breathes beer. The brewmaster waves you over without a word. You're given a rag and told, through silent gestures, to scrub out a wooden barrel. It smells like old grain and slightly sour apples. Your hands get soaked almost instantly, but you don't mind. There's something meditative about it. You begin to understand why monks value silence. It lets your thoughts steep. The brewmaster does eventually speak, only once and only to say, "Don't rush. The beer isn't." You smile to yourself and you scrub slower. Outside, a bell rings again. Sex. Midday prayers. The rhythm of the day rolls on like a steady chant. Prayer, labor, prayer, bread, more prayer, bed. You're caught in the loop now, and it's not unpleasant. Like fermentation, monastic life is slow, warm, repetitive, and surprisingly full of quiet joy. And the beer is only just beginning. The sun is barely overhead by the time you find yourself back in the brewery. Not because you've earned a promotion or demonstrated outstanding skill with a rag and a barrel. No, more because Brother Matthew needs someone with 2 hands and a humble heart. You fortunately have both. The air inside the brewhouse is warmer now, filled with a thick fog of steam that curls around your face and clings to your robe. Copper kettles sit like squat giants, huffing faint trails of vapor. The scent is familiar already: malt, smoke, and something vaguely sweet, like wet bread dreaming of being a cake. You're handed a large paddle, more than spoon, and directed to stir the mash tun, a vat filled with hot water and crushed grains. You dig in, the paddle heavy in your hands, the motion slow and hypnotic. Stir. Pause. Stir again. This is just one moment in the long monastic day, a schedule carved into stone by the rule of Saint Benedict. Your life now dances to its rhythm whether you like it or not. The schedule is brutal if you're being honest, but in a quiet, gentle kind of way. You're not being yelled at or whipped, thankfully. You're just being consistently nudged by bells. And those bells are relentless. There are 8 canonical hours in the day: matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline. Each one marked by prayer, each one wrapped around work. At first, the routine feels impossible. But something strange happens when you give in. Time softens. You stop counting the hours and start sinking into them. The predictability becomes a kind of safety net. You know what's coming next, and for the first time in years your mind stops racing. You stir the mash. You watch the steam rise. You breathe. Mainstream historical fact: monastic communities like the Benedictines, Cistercians, and Trappists were famous for structuring their days around prayer and labor, ora et labora, and their meticulous routines became the backbone of European productivity long before the Industrial Revolution. Quirky tidbit: some abbeys had rotating silent supervisors called the hebdomadarii, whose job it was to make sure monks didn't accidentally talk too much. Imagine being gently stared at by Brother Silence while you nervously tried to remember the Latin for "I need more barley." Historians still debate whether these strict schedules improved the quality of beer, or just made it harder to ruin through laziness. On one hand, consistency and cleanliness are great for brewing. On the other hand, stirring boiling liquid at 4 a.m. doesn't exactly scream perfect conditions. After your shift in the brew house, you're sent to haul water from the well. And not just any water, spring water, cold and clear, hauled in sloshing wooden buckets across uneven stone. You try not to spill, but you fail repeatedly. Still, the monks don't scold. One simply replaces your bucket with a smaller one. "Start there," he whispers. "Water is sacred here, not just in baptism but in beer." In fact, the quality of a monastery's brew often depended on its access to clean water. Some abbeys were built because they were near a good spring. Others dug elaborate aqueducts or piped water in through hollow logs. One monk's entire job might be simply to test and bless the water. By mid-afternoon, the abbey has settled into a kind of sleepy hum. A few bees drift lazily through the herb garden. The chapel bells echo like distant thunder. You sit on a wooden bench outside the brewhouse, sipping the cooled end of a batch from a clay mug. It's thin, slightly sour and warm, but somehow satisfying. Not delicious, but right. This is not beer as you know it. It's cloudy. It's low in alcohol. It's filled with grain sediment and hints of thyme. But it's nourishing. It's filling. It's safe. And in a world where water can literally kill you, safe is the ultimate luxury. You lean back against the stone wall, eyelids drooping. In the stillness, your thoughts start to wander. You remember a story Matthew told, well-gestured, about a novice who tried to drink directly from the fermentation vat and passed out halfway into a psalm. They didn't kick him out. They just made him sing from the back for a month. A crow lands near your foot and hops sideways. You nod solemnly at it. The crow does not nod back. Later you help bottle the beer. Well, sort of. Bottles aren't common yet. You fill wooden casks and clay jugs, seal them with wax and twine. The older monks mark them with chalk symbols, strange squiggles you'll eventually learn to read. Symbols for strength, for herbs used, for the date of brewing. Some even have small crosses drawn on them, a blessing, or maybe a warning. Inside the storage cellar it's cool and damp. You light a stub of candle and gaze down rows and rows of barrels resting like monks themselves, silent, still, enduring. One barrel leaks slightly, leaving a dark trail across the stone. You clean it, of course, but not before taking a sniff. Smells like honey and bread. By the time evening prayers roll around, your arms ache, your robe is damp, and your feet feel like you walked across 3 counties. And yet, there's a strange peace settling in your bones. You're tired, yes, but it's the kind of tired that feels earned. Honest. You take your place in the chapel again, the chants rising around you like a tide. This time, you don't even try to follow. You just close your eyes and listen. The prayers are in Latin. The brew is in barrels. And you? You are somewhere between both, part sacred, part sleepy, entirely still. The bell rings again. You're getting used to it now. Its deep voice no longer startles you but settles somewhere in your chest like a reminder to breathe, to pause, to show up. You're already dressed when the others stir. Your robe smells faintly of barley from yesterday's stirring session, and you've stopped minding. It's oddly comforting, like carrying a hint of warm breakfast with you everywhere. You head toward the cloister walk, where pale light from the rising sun brushes the stone with a sleepy gold. And today you're not going to pray. Not yet. Today you're learning why monks brewed beer in the first place. At first glance it seems strange. Monks, those beacons of self-denial, piety, and abstinence, making alcohol? But in the medieval world, this wasn't indulgence. It was survival. Clean water was, frankly, a myth for most people. Rivers were contaminated. Wells could kill you. Drinking unboiled water was like playing a game of plague roulette. So what did people drink? They drank what wouldn't kill them, beer. Beer was boiled during brewing. It was mildly alcoholic, which inhibited bacterial growth. And it was often flavored with herbs that had genuine medicinal qualities. In short, it was medicine, nourishment, and hydration, wrapped in a slightly fizzy, slightly malty hug. Mainstream historical fact. For centuries in Europe, beer was safer to drink than water. In fact, many monasteries made low-alcohol, small beer, specifically for daily consumption. Children drank it. Nuns drank it. Even cats probably had a sip if they knocked over the right jug. You walk with Brother Matthew to the edge of the garden, where the monastery well stands. He lifts the wooden lid, drops a bucket and pulls it up with a squeaking winch. The water looks clear, but appearances are deceiving. In the monastery's early days, a bad well could doom an entire order. Disease didn't care about piety. That's why brewing was not just allowed, it was essential. You help carry the bucket to the brew house, where today's batch is beginning. You've learned now that the first step is mashing, the mixing of hot water and crushed grain to extract sugars. It smells better than it looks, resembling porridge that's trying to become soup but forgot how. As the mash simmers, the brewmaster lets you sniff handfuls of different grains. Barley mostly. Rye sometimes. Wheat if it's a good year. Some have a roasted aroma, others smell like the inside of an old granola bar. You pretend to know the difference. He smiles anyway. Quirky tidbit. Some monastic beer recipes included bizarre ingredients, like henbane, ivy, or even soot, because monks believed they had cleansing properties. Historians still argue whether these additions improved health or just gave drinkers wild dreams about flying monks and talking goats. Eventually, the mash is strained, leaving behind a dark, sweet liquid called wort. This will be boiled, flavored, cooled, fermented. But for now, it's poured into a giant cauldron that looks suspiciously like it once cooked giants. As you stir the wort, Brother Matthew hums softly. Not a hymn. Something simpler. A lullaby maybe. It echoes off the stone walls. You join him, unsure of the tune but matching the rhythm. The brewmaster doesn't shush you. In fact, he smiles again. This is where the silence makes sense. In a world of clanging markets, howling wind, and shouting kings, the monastery offers a different soundtrack. The bubbling of wort, the scraping of ladles, the hum of monks brewing life itself. Historians still debate just how widespread monastic brewing became. Some say it was limited to survival and internal use. Others argue that, over time, some abbeys began exporting their beer, funding expansions and cathedrals with every barrel. What's clear is that monk-made beer developed a reputation for cleanliness, quality, and something almost holy. You're given a ladle to taste today's batch. It's still warm, a bit flat, but thick and oddly satisfying. Like cereal tea. It lingers in your mouth, earthy and soft. You nod appreciatively. The brewmaster nods back as if to say, "You'll live another day." After prayers, you help clean the tools, rinsing wooden paddles, scrubbing brass valves, and polishing the inside of jugs with a long-handled brush made from bundled twigs. The work is methodical. It gives your hands something to do while your mind drifts. You think about how many hands have stirred these vats. How many voices have hummed these same slow melodies. You're standing in the middle of centuries of repetition, and somehow, it doesn't feel dull. It feels stable. Outside, a gentle drizzle begins. Rain glides down the stained glass windows like sleepy tears. You're not called to the garden. No muddy chores today. Instead, you sit under the eaves, watching droplets strike the flagstones in soft, polite applause. Brother Matthew sits beside you and hands you a small loaf of bread. It's coarse, still warm, and filled with something chewy, onion maybe. You eat in silence. Rain. Bread. Beer in your belly. It's not luxury, but it's peace. And as the bell rings once more, summoning you to vespers, you feel the deep, slow pull of the monastic rhythm wrapping around you again. It's not a life you chose, but it's one you've learned to breathe in. Sip by sip. Chant by chant. Barrel by barrel. You return to the brew house after vespers with fingers wrinkled from washing barrels, and a light ache in your back from the wooden bench. The sun has long since ducked below the hills, and the abbey is wrapped in that special kind of quiet that only comes after a long, simple day. But in the brewhouse, the silence isn't empty, it hums. Gently. Almost musically. Tonight, you'll see the heart of the brewery. The room is warmer now. Not hot, exactly, but pleasantly thick. Steam rises from the copper kettles like incense from a censer. A few monks move around in soft, practiced steps. No wasted motion, no chatter. Each one knows exactly where to go, like dancers in a slow-motion performance. This is the cloistered brewhouse, the sacred engine room of the abbey. You've been here before, sure, but always as an outsider. Tonight, Brother Matthew lifts the latch to a back chamber, one rarely open to novices. He nods for you to follow. Inside, the air is different, darker, cooler, and somehow more alive. You hear the quiet plop of fermentation, the breath of living yeast. Lining the walls are tall wooden vessels bound with iron rings. These are the fermentation tuns. The monks simply call them the sleepers. And that's exactly what they sound like, great, slumbering barrels filled with dreams of beer. The top of each tun is open, and a light foam fizzes quietly on the surface, as if the wort is muttering prayers of its own. Mainstream historical fact. Monastic brewhouses were some of the most advanced in Europe. Monks documented every step, tracked temperatures, recorded yeast behavior, centuries before modern brewing science emerged. Some abbeys even had dedicated yeast strains passed down from one generation to the next. Quirky tidbit. Certain brewhouses had stained glass windows, not for decoration, but because the monks believed different colors of light affected fermentation. Blue windows for cool, red for warmth. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic or genuine medieval microbiology. Brother Matthew hands you a small ladle. You dip it into one of the sleepers, and lift out a scoop of frothy, half-fermented liquid. It's sour, funky, a little alarming, but not unpleasant. The taste lingers on your tongue like old bread left near an open lemon. You raise an eyebrow. Matthew chuckles. That's all the explanation you're getting. The monks work mostly in silence, but occasionally one will hum softly. Not a tune you recognize, just a rising, falling note, like a voice trying to match the bubbling of the tun. It's hypnotic. You find yourself humming too. No one stops you. Historians still debate whether this brewing hum was accidental, meditative, or somehow believed to influence the beer itself. Maybe it did. Maybe it just kept the monks from falling asleep while stirring hot mash at midnight. As you walk around the fermentation room, you notice something carved into the wall, just above one of the barrels. Faint Latin. You squint and trace your fingers over the letters. Benedicat te Servigia. May the beer bless you. You smile. Even in silence, monks had a sense of humor. You help seal a few jugs with wax and linen. The wax is heated over a slow flame, and it smells faintly of honey. You hold the jug steady while Brother Matthew pours. It drips slowly, then hardens, then is stamped with the abbey sigil. A cross, a sheaf of barley, and a sleeping lion. The lion is fitting. The whole place feels like it's napping. The beer, the abbey, even time itself. You clean the work table, careful not to disturb the hand-carved measuring stick lying beside the weights and pulleys. Everything here is built to last. Not flashy, not perfect, just enduring. You run your hand along the edge of the table. The wood is worn smooth by generations of tired elbows. Later, back in your narrow cell, the faint scent of malt still clings to your sleeves. You lie on the straw-stuffed mattress, listening to the sounds of the abbey winding down. Somewhere nearby, the brewhouse still exhales soft steam through its roof vent. You imagine the sleepers murmuring in their barrels. You think about how strange it is, this world of vows and silence and barley. You came here imagining dusty books and candlelight. You didn't expect yeast and foam and the occasional prayer muttered over a bubbling cauldron. And yet, it all makes sense. Brewing beer isn't a distraction from monastic life. It is monastic life. Repetition. Patience. Stillness. Faith. You turn onto your side, pulling your robe around you. The stone walls are cold, but the air smells sweet and warm, like toasted grain and lavender from the garden. Somewhere just beyond sleep you picture the sleepers again. Still breathing. Still blessing. Still waiting for the next bell. You wake not to a bell this time but to a scent. Rich, earthy, toasty. It's seeping through the stone walls of your cell like a whispered invitation. You sit up slowly, rubbing your eyes. For once your body doesn't ache quite as much. You've adapted to the rhythm. A little. Today it's not prayer or chores that await you first. Today Brother Matthew has promised to show you the soul of the brew, not the barrels or the kettles, but the breath of the beer itself, yeast. You shuffle into the brew house, feet making barely a sound on the dew-damp floor. It's warmer than usual. Not boiling hot, but gently heated, perfect for fermentation. The same heat that would be stifling elsewhere is somehow cozy here, like the brewery has its own heartbeat, and today it's pulsing slow and strong. You pass the sleeping barrels, already familiar with their quiet exhalations. But today the brewmaster isn't headed for the fermentation tuns. He beckons you to a small side room, simple shelves, glass flasks, leather-bound notebooks. You've entered the monastery's yeast vault. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval monks, though they didn't fully understand microbiology, developed keen instincts for yeast cultivation. They would preserve starter cultures from successful brews, often keeping them alive through dozens, sometimes hundreds, of batches. Over time, these strains became unique to each abbey, making their beer distinct. Brother Matthew picks up a jar with a cloudy, pale liquid and opens it. The scent hits you immediately, tangy, a little wild, with a hint of overripe fruit and something like sourdough on a humid day. It's alive. You're smelling life. He dips a small spoon into the mixture and lets a droplet fall into your hand. It's cool. Sticky. Bubbling faintly. This is the heart of the beer. Not the grain, not the water, not even the prayer. This. You don't say anything and neither does he. You just watch it bubble. Quirky tidbit. In some abbeys, yeast was treated almost like a relic. Kept near the altar. Prayed over before being added to a brew. There are records of monks fasting or chanting before brewing, not out of ritual, but because they believed yeast was a gift too delicate to be mishandled. You help Matthew prepare the yeast for the next batch. He ladles it carefully into a wooden bowl, then thins it with warm wort until it looks like cloudy soup. Then, with reverence, you walk it over to the fermentation tun together. As he pours it in, he murmurs something, not quite Latin, not quite a prayer. Maybe just gratitude. Historians still argue whether medieval monks knew yeast was alive or just assumed it was divine magic. They didn't have microscopes, but they had patience and intuition. They saw patterns. They learned that some jars created better beer than others. And they listened. After the yeast is added, the brew is left to rest. It will bubble and breathe and change. For now, though, there's nothing more to do. And so, you sit on the steps outside the brew house, watching the mist rise over the garden walls. Matthew sits beside you and tells a story, one of the few times you've heard him speak more than 2 sentences in a row. He tells you about a monk, centuries ago, who tried to isolate a new strain of yeast by capturing the breath of lilies blooming near the chapel. The batch of beer apparently smelled like funeral incense and tasted like regret. You both laugh softly. Then silence again. The sky is overcast. Not gray exactly, more like pearl. Light filters gently through, painting everything in a dull, holy glow. A bee lands on the hem of your robe and cleans its legs. You let it. Inside the brew house, the newly inoculated wort begins to react. You step back in and see the foam forming already, thick, pale, and rising slowly. It's hypnotic. It's like watching dough rise or fog gather on glass. You lean close just to listen. It sounds like sleep breathing. You don't even realize how long you've been standing there until the bell for sext rings, and the sound barely breaks through the haze in your mind. You blink, stir, stretch. You're not tired exactly, but deeply, deliciously still. You help Brother Matthew seal the tun with a wooden lid. Not too tight. The beer needs room to breathe, just like you. Then, something unexpected. Music. Not loud, not formal. Just one of the younger monks standing at the far end of the brewhouse, humming while washing tools. The melody is old, maybe a folk tune, maybe something borrowed from a forgotten psalm. You find yourself humming with him. Brother Matthew doesn't stop you. He joins in. And for a brief, golden moment, the brewhouse is filled not just with the scent of fermentation, but with harmony. A sleepy, imperfect choir of three. No one leads. No one finishes. It just fades like steam into silence. You spend the afternoon outside the abbey walls, though not far. Brother Matthew takes you through the orchard and into the shaded edge of the forest, where a low trail of pilgrims has begun to appear. Not the loud, footsore kind from epic tales, but the quiet ones, wrapped in cloaks, eyes downcast, staff in hand, dust on their boots and hope in their hearts. They're headed toward the chapel, of course, but they always stop here first. You know why? They've heard the rumor. Everyone has. The monks here brew the kindest beer. It's not the strongest, nor the most flavorful, but it has a reputation. It soothes the belly, lifts the spirit, and eases the weary bones of those who've walked farther than they probably should have. And for pilgrims, especially in the Middle Ages, that's no small promise. You help carry a barrel to a shaded bench beneath the walnut trees. Two older monks tap the spout with the ease of practice, and soon wooden cups are filled and passed around, free of charge, of course. This isn't a business. It's hospitality. Mainstream historical fact. Monasteries across Europe were known not just as religious centers, but as places of refuge. Pilgrims, travelers, and even the sick could stop for food, shelter, and yes, beer. In some regions, abbey beer was considered medicinal and was given freely to the poor or traded for basic supplies. One pilgrim, a wiry man with more beard than teeth, raises his cup to you and smiles. His hand shakes slightly, either from age or exhaustion. He says something in a dialect you don't recognize, but the gratitude is unmistakable. You sit near the barrel and watch them drink. Not quickly. Not greedily. Just gratefully. You're not the only one watching. A group of children, barefoot and silent, hover behind the hedges. One of the monks calls them over with a wink and fills a smaller jug with small beer. The super low alcohol version brewed just for times like this. Quirky tidbit. In some towns, monastic beer for children was called Kindertränk or child's drink. Monks believed it was safer than milk, which often spoiled, and less dangerous than untreated water. It was thin, sour, and sometimes flavored with a touch of honey. The children sip carefully. A few of them make faces. One girl scrunches her nose and mutters something that sounds suspiciously like, "tastes like old shoes." You try not to laugh. Brother Matthew sits beside you and watches the scene unfold. He doesn't smile often, but today he does. "This is the real prayer," he says softly. Historians still debate whether monks brewed beer out of compassion or convenience. The line is blurry. Certainly, it helped sustain their communities. But just as often, it helped sustain others. And in a world where hunger and disease were constant visitors, that counted for a lot. You walk among the pilgrims as the sun lowers itself behind the hills. One woman tells you her husband once walked here just for the beer, claiming it cured his aching joints. Of course, he also fell asleep in a ditch, she says, sipping her own cup, so maybe not a miracle. There's laughter. Gentle, polite. Not the loud kind of a tavern, but the quiet kind shared among people who know how rare softness is. You help gather empty cups, rinse them in a nearby trough, and watch as the last few travelers disappear through the abbey gate for the night. They'll sleep in the guest house, on hay mattresses under patched blankets, and tomorrow they'll continue on toward Santiago or Rome or nowhere in particular. But tonight they'll sleep with warm bellies, soothed feet, and beer still clinging to their tongues. Back inside, you help roll the now empty barrel back to the brewhouse. The wheel creaks slightly. You're too tired to talk, and Matthew wouldn't answer anyway. You just walk in silence, broken only by the crunch of gravel and the sigh of wind through lavender. You place the barrel near the stack. It smells different now, emptied of its contents. It's just wood and air and a faint memory of something yeasty. You run your fingers along the grooves. Someone carved across there once. Barely visible now. Maybe to bless it. Or maybe just to mark it as loved. You clean your hands at the well, scrubbing with cold water and rosemary soap. Your skin is stained slightly darker from the wort. Is starting to feel permanent. In your cell that night, you lie down with your arms crossed over your chest. Not in prayer, just resting. Your mind drifts not to scripture or sermons but to faces. The pilgrim who limped but grinned. The girl who said it tasted like shoes. The woman whose husband once believed in barley-based miracles. You smile. Tomorrow you'll rise and stir mash again. But tonight you just breathe. Like the barrels. Slow. So. There's a smell you're starting to recognize now. One that signals a new brewing day before the bell even rings. It drifts through the cloisters, gliding down the halls like a polite guest. Roasted grain, singed wood, and the unmistakable tang of fermentation starting to stir in its sleep. You're back in the brewhouse before prime, sleeves rolled up, paddle already in hand. But today something's different. Brother Matthew has brought out a fresh ton of wort, richer than usual, and places a small scroll on the counter. The label reads Quadragesimalis, a fasting brew. You raise an eyebrow. Fasting in beer? He nods solemnly. Welcome to the strange, sacred world of liquid bread. Mainstream historical fact. During periods of fasting, especially Lent, monks abstained from solid food but beer was permitted. It was considered nourishment, not indulgence. Rich in calories, protein, and nutrients, monastic beer became thicker, darker, and stronger during these periods. It truly was liquid bread. You help with the mash, stirring the thick, porridge-like mixture that will become a dense, hearty beer meant to replace meals for weeks. The malt ratio is higher. The temperature slightly lower. Everything about this batch moves slower, heavier, more deliberate. Brother Matthew hums again, a different tune today. You catch yourself matching the rhythm with your stir. There's something almost hypnotic about the movement, the steam, the weight of it all. You're not making a drink. You're making sustenance. You recall what another monk once told you, eyes twinkling. During Lent, we drink enough to stay holy, but not so much we start seeing angels before bedtime. Quirky tidbit. Some monks in Bavaria brewed beer so rich during Lent that it was jokingly called chewing beer. Legend has it that the Pope in Rome, suspicious of their fasting beverage, demanded a sample. But by the time the barrel arrived, spoiled by heat and shaking, it tasted so awful he declared it sufficiently penitential, and gave it his blessing. As the wort cooks, the brewhouse fills with a thicker smell than usual, like toasted bread with a hint of molasses. Your stomach growls and Brother Matthew doesn't miss it. He gestures toward a clay mug filled with a cooled version of the previous batch. It's warm, slightly bitter, but coats your throat like soup. You understand why they call it sustenance. You help bottle a batch of last week's fast beer, this one meant for the infirmary. Brother Matthew dips cloth in warm wax and seals each jug with practiced ease. A novice beside you whispers that this version is rumored to help the ill sleep better, dream deeper. Historians still argue whether monks deliberately increased alcohol content during fasts to dull hunger or if that was just a happy accident. Most agree that what began as a loophole became a tradition, one that blurred the line between nourishment and comfort. You place the jugs in the cellar where they'll rest beside others, some labeled, some not. One is marked only with a star. You don't ask. Later, while cleaning ash from beneath the kiln, you find a scrap of parchment tucked into the stone, a brewing note from someone long gone. It's in Latin, faded nearly to nothing, but you catch a few words: bitter, blessing, and wait longer next time. Even monks got impatient. In the afternoon, you're sent to deliver a jug to the infirmary. The halls are quieter there. A few brothers sleep behind linen curtains, faces pale, bodies fragile. You hand the jug to Brother Anselm, the abbey's mendicant. He thanks you with a nod and pours a small measure into a wooden spoon, bringing it to a sick monk's lips. The monk drinks, breathes, smiles. It's a small moment, but a warm one. You linger a bit longer, watching the way the light plays on the stone floor. It flickers through the high windows, painting golden strips across the patients' beds. You wonder how many lives were eased by barley in time. Back in the brewhouse, the wort has cooled and is ready for fermentation. You add the yeast carefully, reverently, letting it settle into the warmth like a guest offered a place to rest. The barrel is sealed and marked with the Lenten symbol, a fish etched into the side. Brother Matthew claps you once on the shoulder. No words, just approval. The day drifts onward. At supper, the monks drink this same beer in silence. No meat, no bread. Just a single bowl of broth and a cup of rich, dark ale that hums through your bones like a lullaby. After Compline, the final prayer of the day, you linger behind. Not because you're required to, but because you want to. The chapel glows in candlelight. Incense curls in lazy tendrils. And your breath, faint in the cool air, mingles with the silence. You step outside. The stars are sharp tonight, clear and bright over the abbey's towers. You can smell the faint aroma of barley on your robe, of yeast in your sleeves, of something ancient clinging to your skin. A tradition. A rhythm. A warmth that doesn't ask anything of you but time, patience, and one hand stirring while the other waits. You lie down later not with hunger but with fullness. Not the fullness of food but of quiet purpose. The fast has begun. But here in the brewery the spirit still rises. It's a rest day, at least in theory. There's always work to be done and no one really rests in a monastery. But Brother Matthew tells you to leave the stirring and scrubbing behind for the morning. Instead, he hands you a narrow ledger bound in goat leather and invites you to join him in the scriptorium. You're surprised. Your hands still smell like yeast and your Latin is barely passable. But he assures you that this task is as much a part of brewing as boiling or bottling. You open the ledger and see row after row of strange, spidery handwriting. Symbols, dates, barley weights, grain ratios. A note in the margin, thicker for cold months. Admit next time. Disagree with Brother Hugo. Welcome to the monastery's beer recipe book. Mainstream historical fact. Monks meticulously recorded their brewing experiments. These ledgers, some of which still survive, are a goldmine of early brewing science. They detailed everything: weather patterns, water sources, fermentation times, and subtle changes in taste from different herb additions. The ledger in your hands feels sacred, not because it glows or whispers secrets, but because it holds centuries of quiet trial and error. Some recipes date back over 200 years. Others are more recent, with notes written in a modern hand. But all are anonymous. The work, not the worker, matters here. You read one entry aloud, softly. A sweet blend made with honey and sage, noted as especially well received by traveling monks. You imagine one of them smiling behind a cup, just for a moment before returning to silence. Brother Matthew gestures to the shelf behind him, rows of sealed scrolls and notebooks. Try one, he says. You pull out a dusty folio with a faded cover. The title simply reads, Experiments. Inside are the secrets. You learn that some monks tried fermenting with fruit. One entry documents an attempt to use cherries, resulting in a beer as red as martyr's blood. Another simply says, too sweet. Bees invaded. Never again. Quirky tidbit. A few monastic brewers toyed with putting chalk or ground eggshells in their mash to adjust pH levels, long before they knew the word acidity. One particularly bold monk, Brother Casper, once noted, added nettle extract. Might have been a mistake. Tongue still tingling. Historians still argue whether monastic brewers developed their recipes systematically or by instinct. Some believe they were early chemists. Others say it was spiritual, a matter of listening to the brew, observing its moods, and learning by feel rather than formula. You copy down a basic recipe into your own ledger, clumsily. The ink blots. Your handwriting is too large. But it's yours now, wheat heavy. Mint and thyme. Start with a cold soak. Later, back in the brewhouse, Matthew lets you try mixing herbs for your own small batch. It's not a full brew, just a test steep. You choose chamomile and a bit of rosemary. What? You don't know. It just feels right. Like brewing a memory. You heat the herbs in a small pot of wort and wait. The scent rises slowly, floral, sharp, earthy. It smells like the Abbey's garden during spring after a long rain. Brother Matthew takes a sniff, raises an eyebrow and shrugs. We'll see, he says. You pour it off into a small jug and set it aside. It may never become a full brew. It may be forgotten after today. But still, you made something. And that's no small thing. Later that day during the midday meal, you notice a different beer being served. It's lighter, paler, with a touch of citrus on the tongue. You ask the monk beside you and he leans over, whispering, "From Brother Hugo's lemon-thyme batch." You nod thoughtfully. So this is how reputations are born. After lunch, you walk through the storage cellar again, but this time with new eyes. Each barrel here is a voice, a memory. Some marked plainly, others cryptic. One simply says Rain Batch 4, with a faint drawing of clouds beside it. You wonder what that one tasted like. You find yourself pausing in front of your own jug. The test steep of chamomile and rosemary is still warm to the touch. Still alive. Maybe tomorrow you'll taste it. Maybe it'll be terrible. Or maybe it'll linger. You help organize the shelves, aligning bottles by brew date and stacking jugs in straw-lined baskets. Each label is written by hand, each cork sealed with wax melted over the same old flame. You like this part? The tidiness, the care. It's quiet work, meditative. And that's when Brother Matthew taps your shoulder and hands you a scrap of parchment. One word, experiment. He points to a small barrel in the corner. Unmarked. You roll up your sleeves. Looks like you've got something to prove. You crack open the barrel. Not dramatically, it takes effort, a bit of prying, and a wince when the wooden plug finally gives with a soft pop. A mild, sour scent escapes, not unpleasant but definitely assertive. Like someone politely clearing their throat across the centuries. This is Brother Matthew's mystery barrel. No label. No recipe in the ledger. Just the word experiment on parchment. You dip a ladle in. The liquid is cloudy, the color of weak tea or forgotten honey. It moves thickly, clinging to the wood as it pours. You hesitate. Then sip. Not bad. Not good either. It tastes complicated. You raise your eyebrows and glance at Matthew. He smiles a little too knowingly. Rhubarb, he says. Of course. Mainstream historical fact. Though hops would become the dominant flavoring agent in beer by the late Middle Ages, earlier monastic brews relied on a variety of local plants, whatever grew in the monastery garden. Rhubarb, yarrow, mugwort, horehound, and even sweet gale made appearances in pre-hop Alash. Quirky tidbit. One monastic experiment involved aging beer in barrels previously used for storing smoked fish. That particular brew, according to the record, was declared penance enough without prayer. The barrel was burned. No one spoke of it again. Historians still debate the moment when hops replaced grut, the old herb mixture, as the standard beer flavoring. Some abbeys resisted the change, preferring their secret herbal blends. Others embraced hops for their preservative qualities and cleaner bitterness. Either way, it was monks who documented the transition, batch by batch, note by note. You and Matthew discuss adding a touch of lemon balm to balance the rhubarb. He agrees. You add a handful of fresh-cut leaves to the steep, and the change is instant, brighter, softer, a little like waking up under clean sheets. You realize something. Monks weren't just brewers. They were curators of flavor history. Every batch carried the thumbprint of a season, a soil, a weather pattern. Brewing wasn't just chemistry. It was biography. Later that day, you're tasked with reorganizing a neglected shelf in the brewhouse library. It holds bottles of dried herbs, crumbling labels, some cracked clay pots with odd smells you decide not to investigate too deeply. But between two dusty volumes, you find a folded piece of vellum, the hops debate. Inside, a transcript, of sorts, between two monks long gone, arguing over the inclusion of hops in future batches. Brother Leon, too bitter. Lingers like guilt. Brother Thomas, preserves better. Prevents spoilage. Not unlike guilt. You laugh out loud for the first time all day. You show Matthew the note and he chuckles too. Brother Leon refused to brew anything green for the next month, he says. Despite the playful feud, hops did win eventually. Their antimicrobial properties extended beer's shelf life, made export possible and reshaped the brewing world. But here at your abbey there's still room for the old ways. That afternoon you and Matthew test a Grut blend, a hopless beer flavored with yarrow, rosemary and a pinch of lavender. It's softer, earthy, more floral than bitter. It's like a sip of wild meadow rather than an alehouse brawl. You bottle it under the label Garden Blend. A handful of jugs, marked with wax-dipped rope and a carved flower. You store them on the lowest shelf. Quiet. Modest. They'll probably be forgotten. And yet, that night you take a jug of your own rhubarb blend, now slightly Lemanier, to the guest house, where two traveling friars are resting before continuing south. You pour them each a cup and sit nearby, watching their faces closely as they drink. One tilts his head. The other swallows, then smacks his lips. Finally, tastes like a confused orchard, one of them says. You nod. Thank you. The friar grins. No, that's a compliment. You stay with them for a while, swapping silent smiles and slow sips. They don't ask who made it. You don't say. You just sit together in the lamplit quiet, listening to the moths tapping gently against the shutters. Later, when you return the empty jug to the brewhouse, Matthew is waiting. He asks nothing, says nothing, but he points to a new shelf being cleared. For future experiments. You're woken early, not by the bell but by the sound of hammers. Unusual in the abbey, where most noises are soft, measured, and carefully layered under a blanket of silence. But today even the quiet is being shaped by conflict. A dispute has arrived. Not with voices or violence, but with ledgers, parchment, and wax seals. It's tax day. Brother Matthew meets you in the cloister garden, his face unreadable. He hands you a folded tunic with clean cuffs and gestures toward the front gate. Stay close, he says. But say nothing. That's not difficult. You've mastered the art of monastic silence. But today the silence has edges. It's protective, cautious, like a robe thrown over a very old secret. Outside the gate, a small group of well-dressed men are waiting, cloaks trimmed with red, boots too clean, smiles too sharp. One of them carries a scroll longer than your arm. Another carries a scale. Not for weighing souls. For weighing barrels. Mainstream historical fact. As monastic breweries gained fame for their beer, they also attracted attention from local lords, bishops, and eventually kings. Taxes, licenses, and gifts were demanded, especially when the beer began to move beyond the abbey walls. Quirky tidbit. One French abbey was fined for producing beer too favored by nobles, thereby threatening the royal wine monopoly. The monks responded by brewing a humble version so sour that only the truly penitent could finish it. Historians still argue whether monasteries were victims of taxation or savvy players in a complex game of medieval economics. While many abbeys struggled under feudal demands, others managed to quietly influence trade routes, coin minting, and even political alliances, all funded by barrels. You help roll out 3 casks, pre-agreed offerings to the crown. The taxmen open each one, dip their ladles and taste. One makes a face. Another nods approvingly. The third asks a question you're not meant to answer. Is this the honey batch from last spring? Brother Matthew raises a brow. It is an expression of spring's generosity. The taxman grins. It'll do. You're told to fetch parchment. In the brewhouse library you find the proper scroll, an old agreement inked in black and red, detailing what is owed and when. One clause has been amended more than a dozen times, always favoring the other side. You return and watch as wax is melted, stamped, and sealed. It's strange, this blending of sacred and secular. One moment you're praying, the next you're filling quotas. The same hands that stir wort also sign contracts. The same tools that bless are used to barter. Back in the brewhouse, Brother Matthew leans against a barrel and sighs. Not dramatically. Just enough to tell you he's tired of this part. We give freely to the poor, he says. But we are charged for the privilege of giving. You nod. There's nothing to say. After the visitors leave, the mood lightens. You're tasked with relabeling barrels, removing old wax, repainting faded symbols. It's simple work, but oddly satisfying. Like dusting off memories. One barrel, smaller than the rest, is labeled with a single letter, D. You ask. Disputed, Matthew mutters. Apparently the crown and the bishopric both laid claim to this batch. While the higher-ups argue, the barrel sits, aging, waiting for a victor. You lean close and sniff the bunghole. Sweet, dark, hints of fig and damp stone. You're not an expert, but it smells like something worth fighting over. Later, while sweeping the brewhouse floor, you overhear a whispered conversation between two younger monks. They say the abbot once hid a whole year's tax in the catacombs. With the cheese. With the cheese. You never ask if it's true. But that night, during Compline, the prayers feel heavier. Not somber. Just grounded. A reminder that even monks have to play the game. Even beer blessed by silence can be taxed by noise. And yet, the barrels keep bubbling. The yeast keeps working. The recipes keep evolving. The brewhouse somehow continues. You're sent to the courtyard at dawn to help sweep out broken straw and scatter new herbs along the walkways. Lavender, sage, rosemary. Keeps the pests down, Brother Matthew says, though you suspect it also calms the monks, who pause ever so slightly when the scent rises beneath their sandals. The abbey is unusually busy today. Not chaotic, just buzzing like the hives tucked behind the garden walls. Visitors are coming. Not taxmen this time, but pilgrims and local nobility. And that means one thing. Fresh beer must be served. Preferably without incident. You're tasked with inspecting barrels. Not tasting, not yet, but knocking, listening, checking the wax for cracks, the seals for mold, the barrels for any sign that one might, well, explode. Yes, explode. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval beer was often bottled and barreled under pressure, especially if it continued fermenting after being sealed. If a barrel warmed up unexpectedly, pressure could build until the entire thing burst, sometimes violently enough to break walls or injure passers-by. Quirky tidbit. One account from a German abbey describes a great beer detonation that blew off the refectory door, scalded the abbot's foot, and baptized the choir in barley foam. The monks called it the spirited batch. It was never brewed again. Historians still debate whether exploding barrels were mostly due to improper sealing, poor temperature control, or the enthusiasm of overly ambitious brewers. Whatever the case, it made inspecting barrels a task requiring both ears and nerves. Brother Matthew hands you a brass mallet and teaches you the rhythm. 2 taps, 1 listen. You're to hear a hollow fullness, a sound that rings but does not echo. You nod seriously. You have no idea what that means. You begin. First barrel, firm. Second, good resonance. Third, a bit of a wobble in the plug but secure. Fourth, oh no. You tap. It thuds back with a soft, bubbling glop. Matthew leans in, frowns, and mutters, too warm. You both roll it aside and crack it open. A hiss escapes. Then a gurgle. Then, a foam column that rises like a sleepy volcano stretching its legs. You react too late. Your robe is soaked. So is your face. So is Brother Matthew. He doesn't blink. Just hands you a rag. Well, he says, it's awake. You spend the next hour cleaning the foam flood. The beer is salvageable, barely, but it'll be consumed by the lay brothers, not guests. Spirited, Matthew calls it. You secretly name it Mount Barley. Later, with the barrels selected and sealed, you're assigned to the cooling room, a dark, stone chamber dug partially underground. It smells like moss, candle wax, and very old wood. Here, bottles are left to age more gently, especially the experimental batches. You spot your garden blend on the lowest shelf. A fine layer of dust now settles on its wax-sealed top. You smile. Then you notice something odd. One jug has cracked along its base, likely from an unnoticed flaw in the clay. The beer inside is gone, the base ringed with crusted malt. You sweep it up carefully, but Matthew stops you. Smell it first, he says. You do. It smells amazing. Better than when it was alive. Caramel. Smoke. Even a hint of rose. Some things bloom in ruin, he says, and gestures for you to record the batch in the ledger. Cracked rose. You oblige. The name feels appropriate. Historians still argue whether medieval monks considered brewing more of a craft or a calling. But in these quiet, unexpected moments, between spills and songs, foam and failure, it feels like both. You help set out the barrels for the evening guests. These are the showpieces. A cherrywood ale with hints of nutmeg. A honey-bitter mix created during a particularly cold Lent. Even a wild fermented jug said to be aged in the root cellar for 5 years. You're not allowed to pour that one. Only the abbot does. As you help lift the taps into place, a younger monk leans over and whispers, "Be ready for the noblewoman. She always complains. Even about the color." You ask, "What should I say?" He grins. "Say nothing. Pour confidently." You practice this in your head. Pour confidently. Pour confidently. It becomes your silent prayer. When the guests arrive, their footsteps echo in the cloister, mingling with soft music and the occasional clash of cups. You serve quietly, carefully. No explosions. No foam geysers. No noblewomen complaints. Well, only one. You pour your best. You serve the garden blend to an old scholar who sips, pauses, and hums a note that sounds suspiciously like a contented sigh. Later that night, you walk past the storage cellar one last time. You pause at the barrel that nearly exploded. A new plug has been fitted. It breathes more quietly now. Even spirited batches, it seems, can calm down. You wake with sore arms and the distinct smell of nutmeg still clinging to your sleeves. The feast from the night before left the abbey quieter than usual, less humming, fewer footsteps. Even the bells seem to chime a little slower, as if they, too, are feeling the weight of rich barley and long conversation. But not all monks are resting. You follow Brother Matthew back to the brewhouse after lauds. Today, he says, you'll be learning something more subtle. Less about ingredients, more about experience. About the feeling of a good brew. The difference between beer that satisfies and beer that sings. He calls it sacred drunkenness. You raise an eyebrow. He smirks. Mainstream historical fact. Throughout history, monastic writers described a state of joyful clarity brought on by just the right amount of beer. Not intoxication, but a gentle loosening of the world's grip. A warmth that made contemplation easier, prayer deeper, and dreams more vivid. Monks considered this a gift, not the goal but an occasional grace. You begin with a sip. Not much. A quarter cup of aged brew from a locked cabinet, reserved not for royalty but for ritual. It's dark, thick, and tastes of smoke, plum, and oddly pepper. You hold it in your mouth a moment longer than needed. The flavors shift, settle, breathe. Then it begins. Not a dizziness. Not even warmth, really. But a softness. Like someone just lowered the volume of the world. Quirky tidbit. Some abbeys swore by certain dream blends brewed specifically for night vigils. One monk in Bohemia claimed his recipe brought on visions of angels with barley wings. The recipe, unfortunately, was lost in a fire, or possibly hidden by jealous brothers. Historians still debate whether sacred drunkenness was merely poetic metaphor or genuine mystical experience. Some argue it was psychological, a blend of hunger, ritual, and repetition. Others believe the monks truly crafted beers that helped minds slip through the cracks of consciousness. You sit beside Matthew in the herb garden, sipping slowly from clay cups. The lavender sways. The bees hum louder than usual. A breeze rustles the rosemary. Everything is still and alive. You don't speak. You don't need to. A part of you wonders if this is how the beer feels when it begins to ferment. Warmth rising from within, the outer world gently lifting. You think about all the monks before you who sat in this same spot, on this same stone bench, sipping this same liquid. Some of them saw God. Some of them saw geometry. Some of them probably saw nothing at all. But all of them felt something. Matthew reaches into his robe and pulls out a small parchment. A poem. He hands it to you. You read it aloud, barely louder than the wind. Brewed in stillness, tasted in song. Let this drink make weak things strong. Not for laughter, not for war, but for dreams behind the door. It's inside. You wonder if he wrote it. You wonder if he knows who did. Later you help prepare a very small batch, one meant for private reflection. A low-boil brew with crushed rose hips and a hint of cinnamon bark. You work slowly, gently. You measure not with scales but with your nose. The mash smells like memory, like the inside of an old chapel warmed by sun. You ask Matthew what happens if someone drinks too much of a sacred batch. He grins. They stop seeing angels. They start seeing spinning. At Vespers the cup is passed, only among the elders quietly after the final psalm. Each takes a sip, closes their eyes, nods. You're not part of that circle yet, but one day perhaps. For now you sit in the back of the chapel, the scent of barley still wrapped around your sleeves, and let the chant wash over you. The sacred isn't in the drink. It's in the stillness the drink makes possible. And as the sun sets, spilling golden light through the high stained glass windows, you feel it. Not drunkenness. Not joy. Something quieter. Reverence. You're deep in the storage cellars again, but this time you're not here to clean. You're following the silver trail of something larger than hops, larger than yeast. Something that stretches far beyond the abbey walls and well into the world outside. Barrels. Stacked 5 high. Rows of them resting in cool shadow. And at the very end of the aisle, a wooden panel you've never seen open before, until now. Brother Matthew pulls back the plank and reveals a set of crates. Not beer this time. Ledgers. Receipts. Parchment thick with dust. This is the financial heart of the abbey. And to your quiet surprise, it runs almost entirely on beer. Mainstream historical fact. Many monastic communities used beer production to fund construction projects, from stone chapels and cloisters to entire cathedrals. Especially in the High Middle Ages, abbey beer became so valued that donations, trades, and partnerships flourished around it. Quirky tidbit. One Cistercian abbey funded the carving of an entire bell tower with proceeds from a single year's ale, nicknamed the Golden Batch. Supposedly, the stone mason was paid in daily beer and never asked for coin. Historians still argue whether beer was the intended tool for funding, or simply the most reliable. In a time before centralized banks or financial systems, monasteries brewed something people trusted. Something people wanted. Something people paid for, with coin, livestock, even land. Brother Matthew hands you a ledger. You run your fingers down the columns. Barrel to Lord Gervas, 2 silver. Barrel to Prior of Thornbridge, 1 barrel exchanged. Barrel to Stone Mason, 3 pints per day plus meals. Beer in this world is currency. You open a second book, marked with red string, and find notes of the abbey's expansions, roof repairs, partial funded by apple ale sales. Chapel windows, funded via Bishop's summer brew. You stifle a laugh. It's a strange blend of piety and practicality. God provides, Matthew says softly, but someone still has to pay the thatcher. You spend the rest of the morning learning how the abbey manages inventory. Each brew is logged meticulously: ingredients, weather conditions, notes on taste, strength, and longevity. Nothing is left to memory. One batch, labeled simply 4 bells, shows triple output and a rare note: yeast doubled. Fermented 7 days. Prayer said each morning. The bells overhead? Funded by foam. You learn that not all batches are for profit. Some are made specifically for trade: ale exchanged for salt, for grain, even for ink used in the scriptorium. But some of the richest returns come from pilgrim donations, especially after tasting miraculous blends during feast days. No pressure. Just gratitude. And maybe a little buzz generosity. In the afternoon, Brother Matthew shows you a hidden alcove, no wider than a cupboard, where old tools are kept: measuring sticks notched with faded marks, ladles carved with dates, a wooden hammer too worn to use. He picks one up and turns it in his hand. This stirred the first brew in this abbey, he says. It's smooth from age, warm from memory. Later you help roll out 2 barrels. One for the village, one for a nearby priory. These are not small deliveries. They're diplomatic. Monastic beer maintains alliances, heals feuds, keeps roads open. And occasionally it speaks where monks cannot. You pause to rest in the cloister, watching as 2 oxen carts are loaded. The cooper seals the final barrels, and Brother Matthew scribes one last label: for the Archbishop. Handle kindly. You glance at the stones around you: the soaring chapel roof, the stained glass windows, the thick walls that hold in warmth and history. Beer did this. Not greed. Not indulgence. But patience, discipline, and devotion poured into something ordinary, until it became extraordinary. Not unlike prayer. At supper, you hear soft laughter as one monk thanks another for the batch that saved the west wall. Everyone chuckles. No one explains. You don't need them to, because you've seen it now. The sacred and the practical. The cellar and the sky. It rains all morning. Not a violent storm, but a steady, contemplative drizzle that turns the abbey grounds into a symphony of soft drips and distant echoes. You wake to the sound of water slipping down the leaded windows, to the damp scent of wet stone and soaked rosemary drifting in from the garden. Everything feels slower today. Even the bells seem hesitant, like they're being wrung through wool. Brother Matthew finds you in the cloister, hands tucked into his sleeves, eyes on the sky. We don't brew today, he says quietly. We remember. You nod, unsure what that means. But you follow him anyway. He leads you back to the brewhouse, not to stir, not to clean, but to listen. The fires are out. The barrels are still. The air is cool and heavy with the smell of soaked wood and unlit yeast. Do you hear it? He asks. You don't. Not at first. But then maybe. A slow creak. A soft plink of water dripping from the eaves onto the flagstone. The muffled shifting of the wood as the barrels gently expand and contract in the damp. Even when it rests, the brewhouse breathes. Mainstream historical fact. Brewing was not always constant in monasteries. Seasonal breaks, feast days, fasts, and supply shortages meant the vats were sometimes left empty for weeks. These were the times monks repaired, reflected, and revisited old recipes. Brewing, like prayer, had its rhythm of silence. Quirky tidbit: some abbeys had brewless Sabbaths, where no batch could be started and no tools handled. It was believed the beer, too, needed a day of contemplation. One record claims that beer left to sit in the brewhouse on such a day, fermented with greater peace. Historians still debate the actual effect of these pauses. Did they improve quality? Prevent overproduction? Or simply remind the monks that even sacred labor must bow to sacred rest? You and Matthew sit near the fermentation room. The sleepers are silent today. No foam, no heat. Just barrels at rest, like monks between vigils. He tells you stories. Not loud ones. Not heroic ones. Just memories passed quietly from brother to brother. Of the time the barley shipment arrived moldy, and they had to flavor beer with apples for a month. Of the thunderstorm that struck the kiln but spared the yeast vault. Of the monk who carved a smiley face into a ladle and denied it for 20 years. You laugh softly. Not because the stories are especially funny, but because it feels good to laugh. In this place where silence often rules, laughter feels like incense. Rare, fragrant, fleeting. Later you light a single candle and place it in the heart of the brewhouse. Not for any reason. Just to honor the stillness. You think back to your first day here, fumbling with barrels, overwhelmed by silence, lost in Latin prayers and barley dust. You remember how heavy the mash paddle felt. How loud your own footsteps seemed. Now you hear the yeast. You smell the difference between warm wort and cooled. You recognize when the steam feels just a bit too thick, or when the humming of the brewhouse is out of tune. You've learned not just the recipes but the rhythm. As the rain continues, you clean tools without being asked. You wipe down the measuring sticks, polish the copper rims of the kettles, reshelve old jars in alphabetical order. Matthew watches but doesn't interfere. Finally he hands you a scroll. Your name is written on it. Well, not your birth name. Your abbey name. Below it, a recipe. Barley, elderflower, a dash of wild thyme. It's yours. Not a test batch. Not an experiment. A recipe entered into the abbey's official book. You swallow hard. You're told it will be brewed next season, after the spring herbs return. It will be shared during a festival for new novitiates. A welcome brew. You say nothing, but your breath catches. Because somehow, quietly, without a ceremony or fanfare, you've become part of the abbey's story. One more monk in a long, patient line of brewers who stirred, sang, and waited. That night, you sit under the eaves again, watching the rain drip from the roof. The brewhouse is still. The barrels sleep. And the yeast, somewhere in the dark, dreams. Word count, 1072. Wind down, 300 words. The rain softens. The candles burn low. And the brewhouse fades into shadow, barrel by barrel, breath by breath. You lie in your cell, tucked under a blanket that still smells faintly of cedar and sun. The walls are cool, the stone floor silent. From the distant chapel, a final bell rings, just one note, long and low, and then, nothing. The silence that follows is not empty. It's full. Full of prayers whispered over bubbling wort. Of sleepy chants echoing off fermentation tons. Of stories etched into ladles and laughter carved into bench legs. You feel the rhythm now, not just of the abbey but of something deeper. Something slower. The rhythm of brewing, of building, of believing. You close your eyes and see steam rising, thick as incense. You hear the monks humming, hands deep in mash. You smell barley and thyme and wood smoke and the faintest trace of wildflower. Your body sinks into the mattress. The world falls away, quiet and warm. The yeast sleeps. The barrels dream. And so do you.